The rain hammered against the church roof like impatient fingers drumming on a table. Father Michael Santos closed his eyes, trying to find peace in the sound that once brought him solace. Now, 3 months after taking over the St. Teresa's parish, each drop seemed to carry the weight of all the unheard confessions, all the unanswered prayers. The smell of old incense and damp wood filled his nostrils, mixed with the sickly sweet aroma of candles that never quite burned out. He adjusted his black cassock over his broad shoulders, feeling the rough fabric against his skin. At 42, Michael carried more than just pastoral responsibility on his back. The lines around his brown eyes told stories of sleepless nights, of doubts that gnawed at him like acid. He had left behind a promising career as a psychologist to follow a divine calling, but lately he questioned whether God had truly chosen him or if he was simply running from himself. The sacristy door creaked behind him. Mrs. Hope, the elderly caretaker who had looked after the church for over 30 years, shuffled in. Her small, piercing eyes always seemed to know more than they revealed. "Father, you need to see something," she said, her voice raspy like sandpaper. "In the crypt, I found something that shouldn't be there." A chill ran down Michael's spine. The church crypt was a place he avoided since arriving. There was something unsettling about that subterranean space, a heavy energy that made the air feel too thick to breathe. "What did you find, Mrs. Hope?" The woman hesitated, her gnarled fingers twisting her cleaning rag. "You'd better see it for yourself. But, Father, are you sure you want to know? Some things are better left buried." Michael's heart quickened. There was something in her voice, a warning tone that awakened all his instincts. But curiosity, that old companion that had been with him since childhood, spoke louder. "Show me." Mrs. Hope guided him through the church's side aisle, their footsteps echoing on the cold marble. The temperature seemed to drop with every foot they got closer to the crypt entrance. The stone walls sweated a dampness that made Michael think of frozen tears. The spiral staircase leading down was narrow and steep. Michael gripped the wrought iron railing tightly, feeling the rough rust under his palms. The smell of mildew and decay intensified with each step. His breath formed small clouds in the frigid air. At the bottom of the crypt, illuminated only by the flickering light of a candle Mrs. Hope carried, one of the floor slabs was slightly displaced. Michael knelt, the cold stones biting into his knees through his cassock. "I was cleaning when I tripped," the caretaker murmured. "The stone moved and I saw this." Michael pushed the slab aside. The harsh sound of stone against stone made his teeth grind. Beneath, wrapped in a cloth that was once white, was a small package. His hands trembled as he picked it up. The fabric came undone at his touch, revealing a worn leather journal and a yellowed photograph. Michael brought the image closer to the candlelight. The photo showed a young seminarian with bright eyes and a shy smile, wearing the traditional cassock. On the back, a careful script, "Brother Thomas, 1986. "Who is he?" Michael asked, but when he looked up, Mrs. Hope had vanished. Only the candle remained, its flame dancing alone in the cold air. A shiver ran down his spine. Michael carefully opened the diary, the yellowed pages crackling under his fingers. The first entry was dated March 1986. "I arrived at the seminary today. Father Augustine welcomed me kindly, but there's something in his eyes that unsettles me. The church is beautiful, but the shadows seem to have a life of their own here." Michael flipped through the pages, absorbing the young seminarian's words. The handwriting started careful and organized, but as the entries progressed, it became increasingly erratic, desperate. "April 1986. The night prayers are different from what I expected. Father Augustine takes us to the crypt and I can't write about it. My soul is in pieces. May 1986. I tried to talk to the other seminarians, but they look at me as if I were mad. Or maybe they're also trapped in this nightmare and can't admit it. June 1986. I can't ignore it anymore. What we do here is not prayer. It's something much darker. I need to escape, but Father Augustine, he knows. He always knows. The last entry was just one line, written in ink that seemed to have been smudged by tears. July 1986. God forgive me for what I'm going to do. Michael closed the diary, his hands trembling. The air in the crypt seemed to have become even denser, as if the walls were closing in on him. He tucked the diary and photograph inside his cassock and quickly climbed the stairs, each step echoing like an accelerated heartbeat. Back in the main nave, Mrs. Hope found Matofa tidying the pews. As if nothing had happened. "Mrs. Hope, I need to know about this Thomas." The woman stopped cleaning, but didn't look at him. Father Augustine didn't like the talk about those who departed. Departed? You mean he left? Some say yes. Others, she paused, her eyes finally meeting him. Others say he never left here. Michael felt his blood run cold. What happened to Father Augustine? He died 5 years ago. Heart problems, they said. But I always thought it was a guilty conscience. Mrs. Hope approached him, lowering her voice. "Father, there are things in this church that are best forgotten. Father Augustine kept secrets that shouldn't see the light of day." "What kind of secrets?" "The kind that kill those who try to reveal them." Michael spent the rest of the afternoon trying to focus on his pastoral duties, but the diary burned against his chest like a coal. During evening mass, his hands trembled as he raised the chalice, and the sacred words seemed to have lost all meaning. After the last parishioners left, Michael locked himself in his office. The rain had stopped, but the ensuing silence was even more unsettling. He lit a small lamp and began to reread the diary, this time more carefully. The entries revealed a story of manipulation and abuse. Father Augustine had created an inner circle of seminarians who were forced to participate in rituals that had nothing to do with the Christian faith. Thomas described nightly sessions in the crypt where the young men were forced to... Michael had to stop reading, nausea rising in his throat. A loose leaf fell from the diary. It was a rudimentary map of the church, with several rooms marked with strange symbols. One of them, located behind the main altar, was marked with a red X and the words, "Here lies the truth." Michael looked at his watch. Midnight. The church was plunged into darkness, only a few votive candles flickering like distant stars. He grabbed a flashlight and headed towards the altar. The wall behind the altar seemed solid, but when Michael examined it closely, he noticed that one of the stones was slightly misaligned. He pressed it, and to his surprise, the stone moved, revealing a small mechanism. With a soft click, a section of the wall opened. The air that came from the secret passage was fetid, laden with the smell of decay and something else sickly sweet that Michael couldn't identify. He hesitated for a moment, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The passage was narrow and low, forcing him to stoop. His hands touched the damped walls, and more than once he felt what seemed to be small bones under his fingers. The flashlight cast dancing shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. The passage ended in a small circular chamber. Michael entered and almost dropped the flashlight. The walls were covered with strange symbols carved into the stone, and in the center of the floor was a circle of smaller stones. But what truly shocked him were the objects scattered on the floor. Pieces of cassocks, broken rosaries, and bones. Michael approached, trembling. Among the bones, there was a small metal plate with an inscription, "Brother Thomas, 1986. May God forgive him." He fell to his knees, the weight of the discovery crushing his lungs. Thomas hadn't run away. He had been murdered, and his body had been hidden in this secret chamber for over 2 decades. A sound behind him made Michael turn quickly. Mrs. Hope stood at the entrance to the passage, but there was something different about her. Her small eyes now gleamed with a coldness that made Michael's blood freeze. "You shouldn't have come here, Father," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the small chamber. "You knew," Michael whispered. "You knew all along." "I did what Father Augustine told me to do. We were all servants of a greater purpose." Mrs. Hope approached, and Michael saw that she was carrying something in her hands. An old knife, the blade gleaming in the flashlight's light. Father Augustine said it was necessary, that some sacrifices had to be made to keep the secret safe. Thomas was going to tell the authorities. We couldn't let that happen. Michael slowly stood up, trying to remain calm. "Mrs. Hope, this isn't what God wants. You know that." "God," she laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "God abandoned us a long time ago. Here, we make our own rules." Michael realized there were other sounds in the passage. Footsteps, low voices, whispering. He wasn't alone with Mrs. Hope. "How many more?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Some remained faithful even after Father Augustine's death. Some understood that certain truths must remain buried." Michael looked around the chamber, his mind working quickly. There was a second exit he hadn't noticed before, partially hidden behind a cluster of larger stones. But first, he needed to try something. "Mrs. Hope, look where we are. Look at these bones. This isn't faith. This is horror." Thomas was just a young man trying to serve God. For a moment, he saw something flicker in her eyes. Doubt, remorse. But then the expression hardened again. "Father Augustine said that faith sometimes demands terrible sacrifices, that the weak cannot understand." "Then why did you show me the diary?" Michael took a step back, approaching the secret exit. "Why did you bring me here?" Mrs. Hope hesitated. I thought that maybe you could be different, that you could understand, but you're like the others, weak, questioning." Michael felt the stones of the secret exit behind him. "Or maybe," he said softly, "part of you wants the truth to be revealed. Part of you is tired of carrying this burden." The words hit their mark. Mrs. Hope faltered, the knife trembling in her hands. Michael saw tears glistening in her eyes. "I was young when I started," she whispered. "Father Augustine said I was special, that God had a plan for me. When I realized what was really happening, it was too late. I was already involved." "It's never too late," said Michael, extending his hand. "We can fix this. We can give Thomas and the others the peace they deserve." For a moment, it seemed like she was going to hand over the knife. But then the footsteps in the passage grew louder, and voices began to call her name. "Hope, where are you? Did you bring the priest as agreed?" Mrs. Hope's face hardened again. "I'm sorry, Father, but some secrets are too big to be revealed." Michael didn't wait. He threw himself through the hidden opening, loose stones tumbling down on his head. He heard Mrs. Hope scream behind him, then the sound of running feet. The passage was even narrower and darker. Michael ran crouched, his flashlight swinging wildly, creating dancing shadows that seemed to chase him. He could hear voices echoing behind him, getting closer. The passage took a sharp turn and then began to ascend. Michael climbed desperately, his lungs burning, until he finally saw a crack of light above. He pushed open a trapdoor and emerged gasping for air into the sacristy. Without wasting time, Michael ran to his office and locked the door. His hands trembled as he dialed the police. "Hello? I need to report a homicide, several homicides, at St. Teresa's Church." While he waited for the police to arrive, Michael clutched Thomas's diary to his chest. He could hear movement in the church, heavy footsteps and whispering voices. They were looking for him. The office door rattled. Someone was trying to open it. "Father Michael," came Mrs. Hope's voice. "Open the door. Let's talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Michael shouted. "The police are coming." "The police won't understand," said another voice, male and unfamiliar. "Just like you don't understand. There are bigger things at stake here." Michael backed away from the door, his heart pounding wildly. He could hear sirens in the distance, getting closer. But the office door was starting to give way under the pressure from the other side. With a crash, the door burst open. Michael saw Mrs. Hope and two men he recognized as members of the congregation. All of them carried knives. "Father," said Mrs. Hope, her voice now completely cold, "you shouldn't have gotten involved." The sirens were very close now. Michael could see the red and blue lights dancing in the church windows. "It's too late," he said, leaning against the wall. "Everyone will know." "No," said one of the men. "We'll say you went crazy, had a breakdown, and hurt yourself. Who's going to believe a story about secret chambers?" Michael felt the diary burning in his hands. "They'll believe it when they see the evidence, when they find the bodies." "What evidence?" Mrs. Hope smiled coldly. "What bodies? Do you think we don't know how to cover our tracks?" Michael's heart sank. Of course, they'd had decades to perfect the cover-up. The sirens stopped outside the church. Michael heard car doors slamming and shouting voices. "Police, open the door!" Mrs. Hope looked at the men. "Make it quick," she whispered. Michael closed his eyes, bracing himself for the inevitable. But then he heard something that made his heart leap. The sound of wood breaking. The police were forcing their way into the church. "Freeze!" The voice came from behind the attackers. Michael opened his eyes and saw two armed police officers at the entrance to the office. Mrs. Hope and the men turned, knives still in their hands. "Drop your weapons!" one of the officers yelled. For a moment, everything was silent. Michael could only hear his own rapid breathing and the distant sound of more sirens approaching. Then Mrs. Hope did something Michael never expected. She dropped her knife to the floor and knelt down, her hands covering her face. "I can't take it anymore," she sobbed. "I can't carry this burden anymore." The men looked at her in shock, but they also lowered their weapons. It was as if, suddenly, the weight of decades of secrets had become unbearable for everyone. In the hours that followed, Michael told the whole story to the police. They found the secret passage, the circular chamber, and Thomas's remains. A more detailed investigation revealed that there were more bodies buried in different parts of the church, victims of a scheme of abuse and silencing that had lasted for decades. Mrs. Hope and the other accomplices were arrested. During interrogations, she revealed horrific details about what happened in the church under Father Augustine's command. It had been a system of terror and control, where vulnerable young people were trapped in a web of abuse and blackmail. Michael spent the following weeks assisting the police with the investigation. Each new revelation was like a stab to the heart. He had come to Santa Teresa seeking to renew his faith, but instead he had found evidence of how that same faith could be corrupted and used for evil. The church was closed indefinitely. Michael found himself alone in the empty building, packing his bags to leave. There was nothing left for him there. His faith, already fragile, had been tested beyond its limits. But as he was about to leave, Michael stopped before the altar. He thought of Thomas, the courageous young man who had tried to expose the truth and paid with his life. He thought of the courage it must have taken to write those last words in his diary. Michael opened the diary one last time and reread the last entry. "God forgive me for what I'm about to do." Now he understood. Thomas wasn't asking forgiveness for trying to escape. He wasn't asking forgiveness for trying to escape. He was asking forgiveness for not being strong enough to confront Father Augustine directly,
for not being able to save the others. Michael closed the diary and pressed it to his chest. He looked around the empty church, the votive candles long extinguished, the silence heavy as a shroud. But suddenly, he no longer felt despair. He felt something he hadn't expected: peace. The truth had been revealed. Thomas and the other victims would finally have justice. And perhaps, Michael thought, that was the true work of God. Not the rituals or the prayers, but the courage to confront the darkness and bring the light, even when it cost everything. Michael walked away from St. Teresa's church for the last time, carrying Thomas's diary. He knew his life had changed forever. His faith had been tested and transformed, not through prayer or contemplation, but through action. He had confronted evil and prevailed, not through divine strength, but through human courage. Outside, the sun was rising. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air in his lungs.